All right, hi everyone. My name is Ketene. I am, as I said before, one of the developers at Columbia Road. We help companies get more revenue and more customers through digital sales solutions, such as e-commerce. To enable growth, we use different methods depending on the challenge. In this scope, I'm going to be talking about removing the barriers as a customer through the customer journey. For each click that the user has to make, a company would be losing sales and therefore revenue. It's a friction, and as the time that you spend on the web page increases, the amount of the sales decreases. And so we need to remove the barriers. One of the barriers that we are seeking is basically how much time you spend on the website itself. For each click, for instance, that a user has to go to complete a purchase, the sales amount decreases in the same way. And at the same time, for each time that you spend longer waiting for a page to load, you lose customers as well. So I'm going to be going through, like, for example, how to remove the steps that you need to in order to save a page. For that, I'm going to be showing my demo. Let's get rid of this one. So yeah, here we have a post page. In this page, we are going to be first starting from a point of view of like a client rendering, client-side rendering, and we are going to be showing. I'm going to be showing, like, for instance, how you render the client-side application. So I'm just going to take some code here. In this way, we don't do anything, but let's do this. And here we have basically what we are doing is we want to show a title, a body of the post. And when we are not showing anything, it's just going to be showing loading. And we have a use effect here that has a function that fetches some from the API response, some post with its ID, and then basically set the loading false, and that's it, right? We have a dependency in ID. That's quite classic way of using, for example, in a React application. However, this means like every single time that you do this, the client, the browser, basically has to go through the server and fetch that data, and the user has to wait for the amount that it has to wait in order to get the data the content to be shown. And every single time you do that, that means the client, the server side, can basically throttle you. Another approach to go through this, basically, to reduce the amount of times that you are hitting from the client to the server, to increase the amount of time, decrease the amount of time you spend in bundling the page, is changing this page basically to a server-side rendered application, right? In order to do that, you can basically introduce something called, in NextJS, something called get server-side props. So let's do that together, right? We'll go through with you, and let's see how we are going to be removing the client-side code and putting it all to the server side. First, we are going to use something called get server-side props that is provided by NextJS. Server-side props, and that takes a context and port. That takes a context, and then we are going to get the ID from that context. Query x equal, right? And then we are going to use that to basically fetch data that we want to use. We are going to use the fetch API, and then we are just going to be taking this bit here. Let's get rid of that. Second. And that's a GET request anyway, so we don't have to put anything else there. And then we are going to, let's say, close the wait for request to resolve. And then we are going to be returning that information to our front end, right? So it can be used. Yeah. And then we want to return the post. Yeah. And here we are just going to be returning all of this client-side code. And yeah, we don't need that, and we don't need that either. And then we are going to return the post itself. Okay. So when you do this, and then we basically now changed our application to a server-side rendered application, which is cool. But we have still the same problem, even though that the client side now doesn't make the call to the server, to the API endpoint. We are still making the call from the server itself. So we are still to the API endpoint. So we are still making that call, although the number of calls we are making has reduced. So even though that has changed the number of times that you make the call and the amount of time that you spend in rendering the page, you are still making an extra step that you don't need to, because this page essentially doesn't change almost at all. It only changes for fixes or something like that, but the content, the post content itself stays the same. So I'd like to change that information as well. But one thing that we can look at this point here is something called server-side generation, or static site generation. So we want to basically, what we want to do here is generate the page on the server for the path that we know that exists, and then put that into our server. And so whenever the customer or user comes to the page, we don't actually make calls anymore to the API, but we are going to be just basically getting the page that is already been generated and showing to the user. So that shaves a lot of time from the user side. All right, let's change that information too. Now this prop here, the server side prop, is for rendering from server side. So I'm going to be introducing something new that's called get static paths. So essentially what we are going to be doing here is that I'm going to be saying, hey, do you know what? Get me the product paths, and then we are going to make pages out of those. So let's start with that one. Export. Paths, and that's also doesn't take an argument. And then we are going to do basically the same thing here. So let's just do that. But instead of fetching a single post here, what we are going to be doing is fetching all of the posts, okay? And then use that posts and and map through the posts and basically create pages or paths for our application or pages. Const paths equals to and paths will be basically post.map post, and then here we are going to be returning and return paths, params, and that's going to be the ID of the post that we want to build the page for, and that will be post.id. However, this is it expects it to be string, so let's turn it into a string to be sure. Am I missing something here? Yeah. Fine, that's better. And then we are going to be using this basically to return to our server the paths that we want to do, and then we can use another method called fallback true. Essentially, what this does is saying to if there's no resource in that path, just fall back to something else. So you let your client, you give your client the opportunity to handle it later on if you want to make a call in the front end, for instance. And then we are going to be changing this bit. So instead of having get server side props, let's remove it so we have a better see better function. We are going to use something called get static props. Okay, and that takes params, an argument, and then we are going to fetch ID from that params. Essentially, this is when the user comes to the server. On the server side, we are fetching the ID, and then we are going to use that ID and then get the product that we want. And then ID there. And then post, let's wait for it to resolve again, and then return it to our client side. And then we can, for example, at this point, like one of the things that we are expecting here, what could happen essentially is if the post has changed, we don't want the users to see the same post over and over again, even if it's edited. So what we want to do here is give an opportunity to change that, to revalidate. Actually, after a certain amount of time, we want this page to be deprecated, and then a new page should be created on the fly. Okay. So here, okay, one more thing. Yeah, that wasn't going to work. Let's see, everything looks nice. All right. So let's save. This, of course, won't work in this sense because I'm just running it on runtime. But what we are going to be doing is essentially, I need to fix one more thing here. Yeah, that looks better. If there's no post for some reason, don't do anything. Return an empty fragment here. All right. So we are going to be basically run build. So now we are going to be building our app. Let's see if it works. All right, so it looks like it works fine. You can see here, for example, it has created like the paths for 97 or like 100 pages, and we can see all of those pages. Let's see, where was it? In next, I think it was server pages, posts. So you can see here all of the pages that has generated through, right? So we have every page in our server at this point. So we can say npm start, and then it started it. So if you go to the page, you basically load it from the server side. And if you go to any other page, like it will be still getting it from the server side. But of course, one of the things that is problematic here is that what if you have thousands and thousands of pages? You can't just simply wait for the build time to compile all of the pages forever. So as Jay suggested earlier, like you can use, for example, a way to fetch the most popular products. Here, let's say, I'm just going to be hard coding it for now, and return an array with some pages, let's say. Let's say that I want to have the first 3 pages, 3 and 2, and those needs to be strings again, and then let's put those. And let's get rid of our next here. Let's see. What's trash? Okay, so let's try to build this again. And let's go to the posts page. So yeah, or actually, yeah. So npm run build. So let's build the pages that we want to. So it's still building. Okay, so in here you can. Oh, am I making some mistake here? Ah, for some reason, I need to do this. Yeah, that makes more sense. All right, we don't need this either, actually. Let's try again. All right, and then run the build. All right, so now if we go, for instance, to the pages, yeah, it's basically, why it's keeping on building all of the 100 pages all the time. Yeah, for some reason it's building the 100 pages, even though I don't want it to. Not the trash, yes. Yeah. Okay, now I guess I forgot to save. So we have the 3 pages here, and then if we go to the server and pages, you can have only posts. We have only the 3 pages here generated for us, right? So if we go npm start and go to 84, for instance, now we have the page and it's generated and put to our server as well. So next time a user comes to this page, they will get the page from statically served from the server instead of trying to fetch the information from the API. And if you go to the posts, for instance, this is served from the server side, and one of the things, of course, the browser does is prefetch the pages, so it basically generates a bunch of pages when you do that too, when you go to the post endpoint. But yeah, yeah. So that was the presentation that I had for you guys. If you have any questions, I would be very happy to listen to you.
Thank you so much. That was really an amazing talk. Thank you so much, Noor.
Yeah.
Let's see if we have some questions. We have some comments. I love the collaborative debugging that's going on. So that's great. Let me quickly ask some questions. So there is an RFC that I read on NextJS that NextJS is also kind of coming with ISR. Would you?
Sorry, can you ask the question again? I was reading a comment a second ago.
No problem. So there is an RFC that I read that NextJS is sort of also working on incremental regeneration. So would you like to share something on that?
Yeah, like I was just showing, for example, here that when like you can basically go ahead and share, like generate only a subset of pages that you want to. Like I was just, for example, generating the first 3 pages of the thing. Like you can, of course, now of course it was hard coded, but for instance, you can do it by having an endpoint that say that give me the most popular post that you have or products that you have, and I will generate those pages. And every single time a new user comes in, you can say to them that, hey, like this user is going to fetch this obscure product or post that hasn't been read for the last, like, I don't know, 5 years. So you generate that for that user and then save it in the server for a set amount of time. And that would be served every single time a new user comes in without overloading the build time.
Just quickly, a follow-up question on that. How do you really do that on under the hood?
What's the question exactly here? Like, what do you mean, like under the hood?
So how do you recognize that these are the pages that we need to read?
It's a difficult question to answer, right? Like that has to be an answer comes from the like a business side, essentially. Like you have to define what is important for the business. Like, do they want to? Do they have a campaign where they want to show products to the users or to their customers? Like very fast, or do they want to have at other times pages that is let's say the most sold pages, and for instance at that point when a page isn't like loaded really fast, you lose customers. Like if you have shoes that is like a specific brand that sells all the time versus a shoe that you came up during the campaign or a new product that you want to showcase. And you have to anticipate what's going to be bringing the most of the load there too in advance in a way. Like for example, if you have a campaign, you might anticipate that a certain type of product is going to get a lot of visits. For example, if we have these crazy days here in Finland where people go to like buy a lot of stuff in a discount. So if those products are going to get a lot of visits, you want to basically generate those in advance versus the other products that doesn't have any essentially importance for that moment in time. So it's more of a question of like how do you decide what products or posts or pages are important.
That answers my question. Do Kriti or Jay, do you have any questions or no? Okay, cool. I have one last question.
Sure, go ahead.
Though. So, like you said, like you're already working on SSR. I mean, and SSG as well. When would you recommend someone to sort of actually decide to use Next.js over already using some other frameworks?
That's a very good question. Frameworks and tools and whatever, all of those has to be chosen based on the business's needs, not our needs or our wants. Like I love Next.js; it's like really cool to use. But if it doesn't fit to the business needs, it doesn't make any sense to use it. For instance, like just to make like fulfill my ego essentially. How do you choose what to choose? What makes sense for a business essentially? That's a difficult question to answer as well. It's a good question too. Like I answered that question based on like a few factors. One is, for instance, what's the team is like that is going to be working on a certain thing. Do they have the capabilities or not? Do they have a certain strength in some technology or not? That's pretty much answers part of the question. Another part is basically what about like the technical capabilities, the customer types, what kind of things that you want to show, what kind of interactions that users have. So all of those questions play essentially a part. How do you choose between server-side rendering or statically generated pages? Like for instance, I would always recommend if a content rarely changes or very like it's not very frequent that the content changes for a page and you know in advance what it's going to be. I would very much definitely recommend you to use statically generated pages for that purpose. And but if you know, for example, a page might be changing quite often, then it might be a good idea to use server-side rendering. And the client-side rendering I would recommend, for instance, using if there's an interactive element, like for example, a cart functionality. You want to basically, when you are adding a cart, you want to use a client-side rendering for that or client-side actions. On the other hand, when you are showing the shopping cart itself, you want to, at least for the first load, you want to use the server-side rendering to make things a little bit easier for the customers as well and yourself. But yeah.
That answers my question. Thank you so much. Okay, I think we have Do you have any tips for larger organization who are willing to migrate to Next.js?
Uh, yeah, sure. One, like we had one project. Like there are a couple of ways of doing that. Like for example, if you are a large organization and you have a big application, a legacy application, and you are in the middle of thinking of changing this application, going through a change, and your technical leads are clear, and you know that you are going to go to Next.js. You can do that both ways. One way is basically do it incrementally and make the new and old basically live together and just basically share pages. And then essentially at some point, the new pages or the new site will replace altogether the old site and the functionality. And the users won't lose any functionality in that way. That's one way of going at it. There's a lot of pain involved in doing that. But like it depends on what the business need is essentially. And the other one is basically do work so that you replicate, not necessarily replicate, but come up with a new product that is going to replace the old one. It doesn't have to be a replicate of it. You have learned a lot of lessons from the old tool, the old website, and you know what to carry on and you know what not to carry on at that point. And you know what the business needs are, or at least some people know what they might want to have. And then you can follow that, and then you come up with a new product essentially at some point, and release that and basically set the sun for the other one. That's another one going at it. But yeah, it depends on the company size, organization structure, team capabilities. I hope that answered the question.